Shabbat Shalom. I'm Rabbi Robert Barr, and I'm delighted that you're sharing this streaming service with me and with each other. We're living in challenging and difficult times, and this is a moment for us to pause, to catch our breath, for the days flow one into one another without interruption. Time races on. The Sabbath is our means to divert time, a stepping off point, pausing with friends and loved ones to observe them rejoice in the wonder-filled coincidence of living. And there can be a sense of pleasure in every given breath, blessed with taste to savor and warmth to give and to receive. Bestowed with gifts of sight and sound, we are obliged to cherish and revel in each smile, in every musical note. The Sabbath also awakens us to the silence between notes. It speaks of contemplation, the quiet delight of literature, of unhurried walks, and of rare conversations. The Sabbath can be our interlude, our ritual pause in this lively current, our signal to step more lightly, to appreciate more profoundly, to dive more deeply into the questions that life is asking. Again, I'm Rabbi Robert Barr of Congregation Beth Adam. That's our bricks and mortar congregation here in Greater Cincinnati, and our Jewish community, our online congregation. We've been online for more than a decade. We recognized early that the internet provided us an opportunity to communicate with people literally around the world. It allowed us to share what we were doing here in Greater Cincinnati with others who found the voice of Judaism that we give expression to here meaningful. And now in this age of pandemic, when we are socially distancing from one another, when we're not having services face to face, the internet has allowed us to reach each other and know that we're part of something larger than ourselves. We're part of a people and we're part of a community. So I'm glad you're here. But it's more than the technology that's important. It's also the voice of Judaism that we give expression to, a bold, dynamic Judaism, a Judaism that recognizes that we're not like our ancestors, that they created a Judaism that was reflective and valuable for them, and that we need to do the same, to create a Judaism that is reflective of who we are, what we believe, and what we value. Because our responsibility is then to pass the best that we have to offer to those who come after us, to create a strong, healthy, relevant Judaism and pass it to future generations. So I'm delighted you're sharing this service with me and with each other. Let us know where you're participating from. Remember, when you leave chats, to be welcoming and inclusive. And we also know that many people cannot watch our services at 6 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. That's why we have our services in archives, so that you can watch whenever you're available, whenever you can pause, whenever your schedule allows you to get a breath in this really crazy and hectic time. So we're going to continue our service now with the lighting of the Shabbat candles. The candles of Shabbat stand before us, waiting to meet the flame, longing to share their warmth, ready to shed their light. Like those who came before us, like all people, we find comfort and fear in flame, endless swirl of fascination, mystery and awe. Like those who came before us, like all people, we are graced with the desire and the will to understand. So we continue our ancestors' search for answers, pushing away the darkness of ignorance. The flames they saw as magic and beyond comprehension became flames of knowledge and hope. But still, we look with wonder, inspired by their beauty and their power. We embrace the flames of Shabbat. We embrace the light, our vessel of mystery and understanding. As we light our Shabbat candles, we celebrate our journey, our quest, and our moments of peace. May the light of our people shine. May the light of Shabbat cast its warmth in our homes. May these candles burn with respect for all who push beyond the bonds of ignorance, for all who seek justice, for all who build community. May these candles burn with memory of all who came before us. May we draw on the many ways our people have given voice to their ideas and values. And may we add our own insight to their glow. Baruch ha'or ba'olam, blessed is the light within the world. Baruch ha'or ba'adam, blessed is the light within each person. Baruch ha'or b'Shabbat, blessed is the light of the Sabbath. Several weeks ago, I had the opportunity to have a conversation with one of my mentors, teachers, colleague, and friend, Rabbi Daniel Friedman. And in this conversation, he talks to us about his personal journey from Orthodoxy to humanistic perspective. It is my really great pleasure to be welcoming Rabbi Daniel Friedman to our streaming Shabbat service this evening. Rabbi Friedman has been a mentor of mine, a colleague of mine, and a friend, and I'm delighted that you're joining us from your home in the Chicago area. Thank you for joining us, Rabbi Friedman.
It's my pleasure entirely, please.
Thanks. So I want to talk. You've had your rabbinate was very interesting. You were ordained from the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in 1962, a few years before I was ordained from the same institution. And I actually, just for your edification, all the ordination classes photographs are on the second floor of the classroom building, and I have found your photograph.
So I wasn't lying after all.
No, you weren't lying. You really were ordained from the college. And so you were ordained in 1962, and you immediately moved to the Chicago area and became an assistant at KAM, a large congregation there. So you began your rabbinate as a Reform rabbi. How did you draw yourself into the Reform movement?
Let me begin way back to my childhood. I was born in Denver, Colorado. And for the first 15 years of my life, we lived on the west side. Anyone who knows Denver knows that the west side was and is no longer a homogeneous Jewish community. And there was only one kind of Judaism available to us, and that was what we would today call Orthodox Judaism. So I come from a very traditional Orthodox background. Yeah. In fact, I wasn't aware that there was any other form of Judaism but Orthodoxy. I had never heard of Reform Judaism or conservative. This was in the 50s. Well, actually 40s. The 40s. When I was 15 years old, my family moved from the west side to the east side of Denver, where I was exposed for the first time to other forms of Judaism. And I had friends who were not Orthodox, which was really a very radical adjustment for me to make.
Was it, so you had attended Orthodox services growing up as a kid, and then you...
Oh, yes. Not only that, I went to Hebrew school 4 days a week, plus Sunday school. We had a junior congregation, so on Saturday, all of us in the school had a kind of junior service. So virtually my life was dominated by Orthodox Judaism. I was a very serious student too. My mother's cousin was the cantor of our shul, and therefore we had a very unusual relationship to Orthodox Judaism because the family member was really a very prominent member of the community.
Sure.
So we kept kosher until I was maybe 15 years old or so. I did not eat meat outside the house. I was a very serious kid. Many of my friends were not. In fact, they probably behind my back ridiculed me because I was so serious about my quote Orthodox religion.
I had no idea.
Anyway, then, so I say for the first 15 years, this was my life. I not only didn't I question what I was doing, I didn't realize that there were any questions to be had. Then we moved. As I say, my experience began to change, and I wasn't aware of it at the time, but in retrospect, I began to drift away from my background. And drift is the best word I can use, because it wasn't a conscious choice that I made. I didn't decide to change, but my life as a high schooler and with a whole new circle of friends impinged upon my background, and I found myself no longer going to services that regularly, although I didn't give them up. But by the time I got to college, by the way, which was Brandeis University,
Right.
By the time I got to college, I was no longer what I would today call a committed Orthodox Jew. I had strayed.
And it was unconscious. It was just totally unconscious. It was just it was not volitional. It just happened bit by bit.
Yes. When I got to college, I began to make my first conscious decisions regarding my Jewishness. For example, I decided not to eat in the kosher dining room at Brandeis. Primarily because my friends, the few friends that I had already made there, I would never see them if I ate in a separate dining room. And I began to feel that I was no longer part of my own childhood, that I was now graduated into a different kind of life. And at Brandeis, it's like living in Israel. You don't have to do anything to be Jewish at Brandeis. Right. You don't have to go to services. You don't have to prove that you're Jewish. You just are.
Right.
So I didn't go to a single service, even though I had, prior to my leaving home, gone every single week to Shabbos services.
Wow. I had no idea.
And of course, being in college now, there were lots of other things that distracted me and occupied my attention. So I wasn't really thinking anymore about being Jewish. It wasn't necessary. But actually, when I would go home on vacations, for example, I would be questioned about it. And that's when I began to think about about the journey that I was making from Orthodoxy to what I didn't know. During my senior year in college, I had no plan in mind for what I was going to do afterward.
Right.
My faculty advisor was also a teacher of mine in a course called The Sociology of Religion. And he noticed that I was really struggling. I was, on the one hand, very much interested in what I was learning, but that he realized it was troubling to me. So on a couple of occasions, he sat down with me and tried to help me understand what was happening. I told him that I was beginning to doubt whether I believed in God. He said, good, that's good. I said, I'm not doubting that I'm Jewish. Of course not, he said. But you don't believe in God anymore. Well, I said, I'm not sure about that, but I'm doubting it. Toward the end of my senior year, well, actually in the middle of it, he realized I was floundering for something to do afterward, and he suggested that I consider the rabbinate.
So that was never in your plan. So you spent 4 years in college, and an advisor suggested it.
It never occurred to me that I would be interested in the rabbinate. He said, I know you well enough to know of your interests. You're interested in religion. You enjoy reading about it and discussing it. I think you'd make a good Reform rabbi. I said, Reform rabbi? I've never been to a Reform service. So he suggested that I try it out. So I went. I went to a couple of Reform services at Temple Israel in Boston,
sure,
which is like the cathedral of Reform Judaism. And at first, I was sick to my stomach. This was so foreign to me. An organ was playing. Men and women were sitting together. The whole thing was so anti my past that it was very troubling. But eventually, I began to get used to it. And I would meet with my advisor, and he said, look, you ought to go to HUC, go to Hebrew Union College for an interview. So it so happens that I married my wife on February 3rd, 1957. Our honeymoon was a trip to Cincinnati.
I'm sorry.
to be interviewed by, at that time, Robert Katz. Who was
Dr. Katz interviewed you?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was my first exposure to HUC, and I had to, in order to complete my application, which I decided to undergo, I had to have somebody monitor me while I took some tests. So my faculty advisor volunteered to do that. So gradually, or maybe not so gradually, I got more and more serious about the rabbinate, about Reform Judaism. And I read a little bit about it. I read the Pittsburgh Platform, for example, 1885.
Sure.
I said, hey, this is what I believe. This is me.
Right.
So by the time I graduated from college, I had been accepted at HUC, and I was making the radical transition from everything that I was in the past, Jewishly speaking, to this new, and I thought very attractive form of Judaism, because it was rational.
Mm-hmm.
And during my years at HUC, I drifted even farther away from my background. I became more committed to what I then called humanist, what I knew as Reform Judaism. But I began to realize that it wasn't quite the Reform Judaism that everybody else around me was espousing.
Right.
I looked upon my experience at HUC as a journey toward what I eventually called rational Judaism.
And we actually wound up having some of the same faculty because of even though we were almost not quite 2 decades apart. The faculty, Bob Katz, was a faculty of mine. Dr. Eugene Mahali was probably there. Ellis Rifkin was there. So,
my advisor there was Ellis Rifkin.
Oh, okay. So, and I was Dr. Rifkin's assistant for 2 years.
Yeah, and I was very close to him. I was his assistant. And eventually, when it came time to choose a thesis, a senior thesis, I was interested in Reconstructionism. So he supervised my thesis into Reconstructionism. One of the reasons I was interested in it is that it seemed to me to be an attractive alternative to Reform Judaism. Right. In some respects, even more meaningful, because Mordecai Kaplan's theology was really non-theistic,
right,
quite rational, whereas Reform Judaism still maintained some of its theism, which I was not at all interested in.
But you were ordained in 1962 as a reform from the college, and immediately took what I would call a standard reform pulpit.
I took the pulpit in Chicago with Rabbi Jacob Weinstein because he was one of the most prominent reform rabbis in the country at the time. And I thought I could learn from him, and it would give me a chance to further develop my own thoughts. And incidentally, he was a Kaplanite.
Mm-hmm.
He claimed that he helped Kaplan write his book, Judaism as a Civilization. So he and I understood each other right off the bat.
Wow. So I want to pause for a second. For those people who don't, Reconstructionist Judaism is, so people know conservative, they know Reform, Orthodox. Reconstructionist Judaism is a progressive form of Judaism. Mordecai Kaplan articulated it. There are few congregations. There's not as many as there used to be, and I think they've drifted from some of their earlier principles. But Kaplan was really a religious naturalist in thought and in theology, though the services were traditional in nature. So that's that. I just want to make sure everyone remembers that. But Reform, but you took a Reform, and Weinstein was a Kaplanian as well. I think a lot of rabbis were influenced by Kaplan, and you worked there for several years.
I was there for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
But during my third year, we reached, I created a problem. I was teaching rational Judaism in my adult education classes. I was in charge of the confirmation class. So off the pulpit, I was espousing rational Judaism, which was non-theistic, quite liberal, and untraditional.
Mm-hmm.
Well, people began to complain to Rabbi Weinstein that I was teaching things that he wasn't teaching. Which of us is correct? and they realized that the prayer book, which I was reading from every week, was not consistent with my rational Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
So he called me in one day. I'll never forget it. He said, you're free to believe whatever you want to believe. You can be Jewish and reject God, but not as a rabbi. As a rabbi of a congregation, these people aren't ready for that message. You can be a Reform rabbi, but not a rational rabbi in your use of the term. He said, why don't you become a Hillel rabbi?
Mm-hmm.
Because nobody cares what you do there.
That's because there's rabbis who work with college students. That's what makes everyone for Hillel, right?
There's a turnover every 4 years, so you never get in too deep, and you can say whatever you want. Nobody will bother you. So I actually interviewed for Hillel positions, especially in Chicago, and at the same time, my wife's family, by the way, lived in the northern suburbs of Chicago, so we had an attachment beyond my job.
Right.
But at the same time that I was beginning to leave my first post, I was beginning to develop my question: where am I going next? I decided that I wanted to go to a congregation that was open to change, that was willing to experiment with what I called at that time rational Judaism. And during my interview sessions with that congregation, Beth Or in Deerfield, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago, I began to explore with the interview committee what I hoped to do. I told them, I brought along a copy of the Union Prayer Book, and I said, I don't believe these prayers anymore, and I'm sure that some of you don't either. And we started to talk about the changes that I was anticipating, and they were very excited. They thought this was great. They agreed with me. So we had a good match. And I was able to go from my 3-year tenure at KAM on the south side of Chicago to my new congregation in the northern suburbs, Beth Or. I didn't even have to change the name of the congregation. It wasn't Emmanuel. It wasn't a theistic.
Right. It was House of Light. So that worked really well.
Right. It was a perfect name for me.
And so you took this, and Beth Or was at that moment, at that time, a Reformed congregation.
It had been in existence for 3 or 4 years. They had a rabbi from New York who was not a good fit at all. They knew this almost immediately, but as soon as they were able to relieve him of his job, they did, and they started to look for a new rabbi. And I was the one they had in mind. I was young. I was my 30s. I had new ideas, fresh ideas. I was very enthusiastic, and they loved me.
So you took this congregation from being a Reformed congregation and brought it to rational Judaism, non-theistic Judaism. I remember the services. You wrote services. You created services. In fact, early on in Beth Adam's history, we drew from some of your writings inspiration. We actually asked you for permission to use some of your early writings or some of those writings at our early services. So you were really at the forefront, and this would have been in like 65, 66, in creating a new voice for Judaism.
Right. And then a little after that, maybe 68, 69, I had heard about a rabbi in Detroit, Sherwin Wine, who I thought was saying virtually the same things I was saying, only he called it humanistic Judaism. Mm-hmm. So I arranged to meet with him. We got along very well. And I visited the Birmingham Temple, which is known to you.
Right.
And was very enthusiastic about what they had achieved. They had tremendous energy and talent and imagination. And Sherwin Wine was a very strong personality and leader. So I began to think, maybe we can do this at our congregation. And I realized that the word humanistic seemed much more acceptable to people than the term rational. Rational sounds cold and sort of unforgiving, whereas humanistic is warm and so forth. So I began to use that term instead. And actually, I invited Sherwin Wine to speak at our congregation, which he did. And that was part of a process that brought about a crisis in the congregation, which, to make a long story short, required them to decide, are they going to be a humanistic congregation with all that that implies, or are they going to remain a reform quote or / rational congregation?
Right.
I won't go into all the aspects of the crisis, but the long and short of it was they voted overwhelmingly to become a humanistic congregation.
So it's so interesting, to hear this, because, people who have met me and our congregation, Beth Adam, they know our congregation, but they don't know that there's a history before that of, there are people who are trying to recreate Judaism early on, Kaplan doing it, and then you and Wine doing it in your individual ways and coming together, and then taking pre-existing, Beth Or was a pre-existing congregation, and it takes a lot of skill and leadership and vision to be able to take a community of people and work with them to embrace a brand new identity. And you were able to do that, and you served that congregation for over 30 years, as I recall.
35 years. But I must say, it was scary at first. In fact, there were many occasions when I doubted that it would succeed. I even interviewed, again, I went to Hillel and the University of Chicago to interview to see if they were interested in a humanistic rabbi.
Just in case. We have to pause now. This is fascinating. We're going to do several different conversations, but this was so interesting about your personal history, the journey from Orthodoxy to Humanism through Hebrew Union College. And so the growth and change that you experienced and how you were able to bring it to your rabbinate and to a congregation. So thank you for taking the time, and I look forward to continuing our conversation.
It was my great pleasure. Thank you.
It was very meaningful for me to have a conversation with Rabbi Daniel Friedman. Over the years, I have leaned upon him, sought out his wisdom and his friendship. He is someone who I find inspiring, and I hope you found our conversation interesting, fascinating, and inspiring as well. And I look forward to sharing with you the other conversations that he and I had in the months to come. And now, we continue our service with the virtual challah. It is an expression of the fact that though we are distant, we are part of something larger than ourselves, a community. So at this moment, we come together to welcome the Shabbat. We take pause, breathe in life, and reflect on the importance of each of our lives. We feel this touch of the spirit on the body, the warmth of fellow human beings. We embrace our uniqueness and our diversity, our capacity to create, to explore, to change our world. In the sharing the challah, the Sabbath bread, we nourish our spirit, and we are connected with each other and with our ancestors. Baruch Amal Kapenu, blessed is the work of our hands. Baruch Hazon Adam, blessed is the vision of our minds. Baruch Lechem Haaretz, blessed is the bread of the earth. And then if you have some juice or some wine, join with me. Life is a wondrous gift. The mind observes with awe, and appreciation flows from the heart. Joyful bounties are unveiled, and such treasures abound in ordinary moments. A familiar face, the simplicity of a smile, tender kisses, the warmth and security of a hug, enchanting melodies, grace of dance, the coolness of sculpted marble, a remarkable story. The complexity of atomic structure, thunder's reverberation, the shimmering of the rainbow, intoxicating rose petals. These moments become opportunities to affirm that which is good. As we lift the cup, a tribute to life's enchantments, may we find joy and contentment in our human endeavors. Bruchim chachayim ba'olam. Blessed is the life within the world. Bruchim chachayim ba'adam. Blessed is the life within each person. And we say, l'chaim, to life. So I'm delighted you were able to share this Shabbat service with me, and I hope you share the services to come. Next week is our memorial Shabbat service. That means that during our service, we read the names of deceased loved ones. If there are names that you would like included in our memorial list, please send them to me at rabbi@bethadam.org, rabbi@ bethadam.org. And if you put in the subject line memorial names, that would be very helpful. And please send them to me by by Wednesday. Please send them to me by Wednesday. We prepare the service a little in advance, and it's important that I have the time to find all the emails that I received and to make sure I include them in the memorial list. Also, I encourage you to go to bethadam.org. Bethadam.org, that's our website. And there you can find out about upcoming events. You can listen to my podcast. The most recent one is always on the homepage. But if you click on Bar's Banter, that icon, it will take you to a page that has my podcast going back many, many years. You can listen to my sermon if you didn't have a chance to hear it that I gave for Martin Luther King Day at Zion Baptist Church. So I'm pleased you were here, and we can close with the words we close with each week. May we know blessings those who are near, and may we know blessings those who are far. And may this Sabbath bring its goodness to everyone soon, wherever they are. Shabbat Shalom.